19-year-old Zariah Brooks stood alone in a Seattle courtroom, wrists cuffed, eyes steady, while the judge and prosecutor laughed openly at her. A poor black girl, they said. Uneducated. No way someone like her could uncover a massive corporate cybercrime. Their mockery echoed through the room, loud and certain. But they didn't know that Zariah wasn't there to plead. She was there to expose. While they joked, she was tracing falsified logs, buried servers, and digital fingerprints meant to never be seen. When she calmly asked to defend herself, the laughter faded. The courtroom wasn't a place of judgment anymore. It was a battlefield. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Seattle woke beneath a low gray sky, the kind that pressed gently but relentlessly against the city. A fine mist drifted between glass towers and old brick buildings, softening the sharp lines of downtown. Traffic moved slower than usual, tires whispering against wet asphalt. By the time the courthouse came into view, solid, stone-faced, unmoved by weather or time, the rain had thinned to a cold drizzle, as if even the sky were holding its breath. Inside the King County Superior Court, warmth replaced the chill, but not comfort. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper, a scent that clung to history and judgment alike. Zariah Brooks stood at the defense table. She was 19 years old, slim but not fragile, 5'6" with narrow shoulders that had learned early how to carry weight. Her skin was a deep, even brown, unadorned by makeup. Her hair, thick, naturally curly, was pulled back into a tight low tie, not for style, but for control. Her face held no softness today. Large, dark eyes sat steady beneath straight brows, watching without pleading. She wore a plain gray sweater, sleeves slightly frayed at the cuffs, and dark jeans that had been washed too many times. Everything about her said functional. Nothing about her said defendant, except the cuffs resting on the table in front of her. Zariah did not fidget. She did not look at the jury. She did not look at the audience. She looked forward, waiting. At the bench sat Judge Malcolm Hargrove. Hargrove was in his early 60s, broad through the chest, heavy in the shoulders, with thinning steel-gray hair combed neatly back. His robe hung from him like authority itself, worn, familiar, unquestioned. He had the face of a man who believed deeply in order, and equally deeply in his ability to recognize it at a glance. Thick eyebrows shadowed pale eyes that had seen thousands of defendants and learned to sort them quickly. Threat, nuisance, mistake, waste. Today, his mouth curved in faint amusement. To his right stood Grant Holloway, lead prosecutor for the state. Holloway was 42, tall, athletic, and meticulously put together. His suit was charcoal, tailored close to the body, his tie a precise navy blue. His hair was dark, cut short, never out of place. He had the easy confidence of a man who had never had to wonder whether his voice would be heard. When he smiled, it wasn't warmth. It was performance. He smiled the way a man smiles when he already knows the ending. Holloway glanced toward Zariah, then back to the judge. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "the state is prepared to proceed." The charge echoed in the courtroom like something unreal. A large-scale cyber intrusion, unauthorized access to corporate infrastructure, data exfiltration tied to a multi-million-dollar breach. The alleged target, North Harbor Systems, a powerful technology conglomerate whose name carried weight in boardrooms and government contracts alike. Holloway turned slightly, pacing once, then stopped. He looked directly at Zariah for the first time, and he laughed. Not loudly, not uncontrollably, but enough. A short, dismissive sound, sharp with disbelief. "Your Honor," Holloway said, gesturing loosely toward her, "we are being asked to believe that this—" He paused, letting the word land. 19-year-old defendant somehow penetrated enterprise-level security systems designed by teams of senior engineers. A ripple moved through the gallery. Some smiles, some raised eyebrows. Holloway continued, emboldened. No formal education in computer science, no employment history in the tech sector, raised in underfunded schools, limited resources. And yet we are meant to accept that she single-handedly executed an operation that seasoned professionals spend years preparing for. He shook his head, almost kindly. Respectfully, Your Honor, it borders on fantasy. Judge Hargrove leaned back slightly in his chair. His lips twitched. I must admit, he said, voice slow and measured, I share some difficulty with the premise. A few people chuckled. Not loudly. Enough. Zariah felt it, not as embarrassment, but as pressure, like air changing before a storm. She kept her eyes forward. Holloway pressed on. This court is not a classroom for speculation, he said, nor is it a stage for political narratives. The defendant's background speaks for itself. That word again. Background. Judge Hargrove nodded. Ms. Brooks, he said, finally addressing her directly, do you have counsel present? Zariah remained silent. Seconds passed. Her public defender, an overworked man in a wrinkled suit, shifted uncomfortably beside her, but she did not look at him. Finally, she raised her head. Her voice, when it came, was calm, clear, unhurried. I did it, Zariah said. The room stilled. Holloway's smile widened, triumphant, until she continued. I accessed their systems. I traced their internal traffic. I followed the money and the code. She paused, letting the words settle. And I did it to uncover their crimes. A murmur rose instantly. Judge Hargrove's expression hardened. Ms. Brooks, he warned, this is not the time for speeches. Zariah met his gaze directly. It's the only time, she replied, because you're laughing at the wrong thing. Holloway scoffed openly now. Your Honor, he said, this is exactly the kind of fantasy I referenced. Zariah didn't turn to him. She spoke forward, to the room. You think I couldn't do it because you don't think someone like me learns, she said evenly. You think poverty makes ignorance permanent. You think silence means confusion. She inhaled once. You're wrong. The judge leaned forward. And you expect this court to simply take your word for it? No, Zariah answered. I expect the court to let me prove it. A beat, then laughter again, this time louder, from Holloway, from the gallery. Judge Hargrove allowed it to happen. At the back of the courtroom sat Maya Linford. Maya was 27, Asian American, petite, with sharp eyes behind thin-framed glasses. Her black hair was cut just past her shoulders, practical and often hastily tied back. She wore a tan trench coat still damp from the rain and clutched a leather notebook to her chest like armor. Maya was an investigative journalist, one of the few who still believed patience mattered. She had been warned by court staff earlier that morning. No disruptions, no commentary. One misstep and you're removed. But Maya wasn't here by accident. 3 days ago, an encrypted message had landed in her inbox. One word in the subject line. Sea glass. No explanation, no sender, just a time and a courtroom number. Maya watched Zariah now, something tightening in her chest. Outside the courtroom doors, leaning against the wall, stood Raymond Ray Cole. Ray was 70, tall once but now bent slightly at the spine, his weight resting on a black metal cane. His face was lined deeply, carved by age and years of service. White hair framed a weathered face with sharp blue eyes that missed little. He wore a simple brown coat, worn at the elbows, and polished shoes that suggested old habits never die. Ray had been a federal investigator for over 30 years, and North Harbor Systems had ended his last case. He listened as laughter spilled faintly into the hall. Ray's jaw tightened. Back inside, Judge Hargrove raised his gavel slightly, not to strike, but to command attention. "Miss Brooks," he said, voice cool now, "you will refrain from making unsubstantiated accusations." Zariah nodded once. "I understand," she said, "but I also understand their systems better than they think." Holloway leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable. "Your Honor, this is precisely why the state believes detention is necessary," he said. "The defendant is attempting to frame a narrative rather than respond to evidence." Judge Hargrove considered this. Zariah felt the weight shift. This was only the beginning, and the laughter still echoed. The laughter hadn't fully faded when the court clerk called for order again. It lingered in the air like smoke after a small fire, thin, irritating, impossible to ignore. Zariah Brooks remained standing at the defense table, her posture unchanged, hands resting lightly near the cuffs as if they were just another object in the room. The public defender beside her shifted his weight from one foot to the other, sweat darkening the fabric beneath his collar. His name was Thomas Keene. Late 40s, average height, soft around the middle. His suit had once been navy but had faded to a tired blue over years of overuse. Keene wasn't a bad man. He spoke gently to clients, remembered names, tried to care, but the system had worn him down. 37 open cases, 2 trials overlapping, a mortgage behind by 3 months. He had learned to survive by moving quickly, not by fighting deeply. And today he knew, viscerally, that this case was already slipping out of his hands. "Your Honor," Keene began, clearing his throat. "If I may—" Zariah lifted one finger slightly. Not rudely, precisely. "I'd like to address the court," she said. Keene froze. He glanced at her, eyes wide, silently pleading, "Don't." Judge Malcolm Hargrove raised a brow. "Ms. Brooks, you are represented." "I am," Zariah replied evenly. "But I'm asking to represent myself?" The room reacted instantly. A ripple of sound. Laughter again, louder this time, less restrained. Someone in the gallery shook their head in disbelief. Grant Holloway let out a short, amused breath and turned slightly toward the jury box, as if sharing an inside joke. "Self-representation?" Holloway said, voice dripping with mock patience. "Your Honor, the defendant hasn't even completed high school." That word again. Completed. Zariah felt Keene's hand twitch beside her, a reflexive urge to interrupt, to protect, to salvage something. She spoke before he could. "That's incorrect," she said. Judge Hargrove leaned forward, folding his hands. "You may explain," he said, though the tone suggested skepticism, not invitation. Zariah nodded once. Her pulse was steady. She had rehearsed this, not in front of a mirror, but in the quiet hours when doubt crept in, and she answered it with facts. "I tested out," she said. "Passed the GED at 14, enrolled in a state-approved accelerated legal studies track at 16, completed the bar-eligible coursework last month." Holloway laughed outright. "Bar-eligible," he repeated, savoring the words. "Through what? Online videos and forums?" "No," Zariah said. "Through an ABA-recognized accelerated program funded by private scholarships." The laughter softened, replaced by murmurs. Judge Hargrove's eyes sharpened. "Scholarships," he echoed. "From whom?" "Anonymous donors," Zariah replied. "Merit-based. Blind review." Holloway shook his head. "Convenient." Zariah didn't rise to it. She continued. "I also hold certifications in network security, intrusion detection, and digital forensics. I've competed under aliases in federally sanctioned cybersecurity challenges. I didn't submit my name because I didn't need recognition. I needed access." The courtroom quieted. Not silence, but attention. Thomas Keene stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Judge Hargrove exhaled slowly. Even if all of that were true, he said, self-representation in a felony case is highly irregular. It's constitutional, Zariah answered, and it's my right. Holloway stepped forward. Your Honor, this is theater. She's attempting to confuse the court and delay proceedings. Zariah turned to him then. Finally, her eyes met his, dark, unblinking. I'm attempting to prevent a lie from becoming precedent, she said. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Holloway's face. Then it was gone. Judge Hargrove tapped his gavel lightly, not to strike, but to think. He studied Zariah as if recalibrating an equation that no longer balanced. Ms. Brooks, he said at last, if I allow this, you will have standby counsel. Mr. Keene will remain present. Any disruption, and this privilege is revoked. Do you understand? Yes, Zariah said, I do. The gavel came down once. Decisive. Very well. The decision landed harder than any laughter had. At the back of the courtroom, Maya Linford felt her breath catch. She scribbled furiously in her notebook, fingers smudging ink across the page. She had covered trials before, messy ones, tragic ones, but she had never seen momentum shift like this in a single exchange. Still, instinct warned her. This wasn't victory. It was permission to enter the maze. When the court recessed briefly, Maya slipped into the hallway. Near the water fountain, a man she didn't recognize brushed past her. Mid-30s, athletic build, baseball cap pulled low. He didn't stop. He didn't speak. He simply pressed something into her coat pocket as he passed. A USB drive. Black. Unmarked. By the time Maya turned, he was gone. She retreated into a corner, heart pounding, and examined it. No label, no brand. Just a small engraving on the metal edge. A wave. Sea glass. Back inside, Zariah remained seated while Keene whispered urgently at her side. You didn't tell me any of this, he said, voice low, not accusatory, just stunned. I didn't know if you'd believe me, Zariah replied. Keene swallowed. I do now. Outside, leaning against the same cold stone wall, Ray Cole's phone vibrated in his coat pocket. He answered without looking at the screen. Cole, he said. A voice responded. Calm, male, unfamiliar. You should go home, the voice said. Seattle weather isn't kind to old men. Ray's grip tightened on his cane. And if I don't? A pause. Then, that cane won't help you. The line went dead. Ray stared at the phone for a long moment before sliding it back into his pocket. His face didn't change, but something settled behind his eyes. A decision long delayed, now unavoidable. Back in the courtroom, Judge Hargrove called proceedings to resume. Zariah rose, no longer just a defendant, but something more dangerous to the room's assumptions. She caught Maya's eye briefly. Maya nodded, almost imperceptibly. The system had laughed. Now it was listening. The courtroom lights hummed softly as the first digital exhibits were pulled onto the large monitor mounted above the jury box. Zariah Brooks stood, not behind the defense table this time, but a step closer to the center aisle, where she could see both the screen and the faces watching her. The shift was subtle, but it mattered. She wasn't hiding behind counsel anymore. She was presenting. Exhibit 12, the clerk announced. Lines of data bloomed across the screen. Timestamps, IP addresses, server identifiers. To most eyes, it looked like static. To Zariah, it was a map. She didn't rush. She let the room settle into discomfort. These are the access logs North Harbor submitted, she said, her voice even. They claim this proves I breached their internal systems. Grant Holloway folded his arms, posture relaxed, lips curved in a knowing half-smile. He had the look of a man watching someone walk confidently toward a wall he knew was solid. Zariah raised a small remote and highlighted a section of the log. What's missing, she continued, is the handshake. A few jurors exchanged glances. Judge Malcolm Hargrove leaned forward slightly. Handshake? He asked. Yes, Zariah replied. The server-side authentication handshake. Every legitimate access leaves one. It's not optional. It's physics, not preference. Holloway stepped forward. Your Honor, the defendant is doing exactly what we warned about, throwing jargon at people who aren't engineers. Zariah didn't look at him. She clicked again. Another section lit up. These timestamps, she said, are clipped, not rounded, not delayed, cut. That only happens when logs are reconstructed. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Hargrove raised a hand. Miss Brooks, be careful. Allegations of fabrication require more than interpretation. Zariah nodded. That's why I'm not finished. She zoomed in on a graph. This shows network latency. If the access came from my location, the delay would reflect the route. It doesn't. The signal behaves as if it originated inside the building. Holloway laughed softly. Or, he said, it means the defendant is guessing. Zariah finally turned to him. Or it means the breach was staged. The word landed hard. Staged, she repeated, to conceal money laundering and manipulated security reports. The room reacted. Some gasps, some scoffs. Holloway's smile vanished. Objection. Speculation. Judge Hargrove struck the gavel once. Ms. Brooks, you are walking a line. You must present admissible evidence, not theories. Zariah inhaled, steadying herself. Understood, Your Honor. Then let me be clear. These logs do not prove I hacked North Harbor. They prove someone wanted it to look that way. The judge's gaze sharpened. Do you have proof of who that someone is? Zariah paused. Just a fraction too long. No, she said, not yet. The silence that followed was different, less mocking, more dangerous. Holloway seized it. Your Honor, the defendant admits she lacks evidence. This is theatrics. Judge Hargrove nodded once. Ms. Brooks, the court will not allow conjecture to masquerade as fact. Continue only with verifiable material. Zariah stepped back. She had expected this. She had planned for it. But planning did not soften the weight of the moment. She returned to the table, hands resting flat, eyes forward. At the back of the room, Maya Linford sat perfectly still, her heart racing. During the brief recess, she had slipped into a restroom stall and plugged the USB into her laptop. The device was locked, but not silent. The courtroom felt narrower than it had the day before, as if the walls themselves had shifted inward during the night. Zariah Brooks stood again at the defense table, a thin folder in her hands. It wasn't thick. It wasn't impressive. And she knew, even before she spoke, that it would not be enough. Your Honor, she began, steady but quieter than before, I'd like to introduce preliminary evidence connected to an internal accounting framework referred to as the Lighthouse Ledger. Grant Holloway straightened immediately. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply smiled, the way a man smiles when he sees an opening exactly where he expected one to be. Objection, he said. Chain of custody. Judge Malcolm Hargrove didn't strike the gavel. He didn't need to. His eyes were already on Zariah. Ms. Brooks, he said, before we go any further, where did this material originate? Zariah hesitated. Only a breath. But it mattered. From a source inside North Harbor, she said. Anonymous. Holloway let out a soft chuckle. Anonymous, he repeated, turning slightly toward the jury. So we have no identity, no verification, no forensic trail establishing how this data was obtained or preserved. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, this is precisely why the state objected to allowing the defendant to conduct her own defense. Zariah felt the pressure immediately, not loud, not dramatic, but crushing. She adjusted the folder, aligning the edges as if precision could substitute for authority. "I'm not asking the court to accept this as conclusive proof," she said. "I'm asking the court to recognize it as cause." "Cause for what?" the judge asked. "For discovery," Zariah answered. "For a subpoena compelling North Harbor Systems to produce their original servers." The room reacted before the bench did. A low murmur. A few jurors leaned forward. One woman, mid-40s, schoolteacher by the look of her cardigan and careful posture, frowned, uncertain. Holloway moved fast. "Your Honor, this request is excessive," he said. "North Harbor is not on trial. This would turn a straightforward criminal proceeding into a fishing expedition." Judge Hargrove steepled his fingers. "Ms. Brooks, you are asking this court to compel a major corporation to surrender core infrastructure based on unverified material." Zariah nodded. "Yes. Do you understand the precedent that would set?" "I understand the precedent of ignoring it," Zariah replied, "and what that costs." For a moment, Judge Hargrove said nothing. He looked at the folder, then at Zariah, then at Holloway. The power imbalance was visible, almost physical, like a weight pulling the scale down no matter how carefully the other side stacked their argument. "I am not prepared," the judge said finally, "to issue such a trat based on speculative linkage." The word speculative echoed louder than any laughter had. Zariah felt something settle in her chest. Not panic. Isolation. She closed the folder and placed it gently on the table. "I understand," she said. The jury watched her closely now. The earlier certainty had cracked. They didn't trust Holloway the way they had before. But suspicion alone was not justice. They needed something undeniable, and she didn't have it. Outside the courthouse, Maya Linford knew she was being followed. It wasn't the same person twice. That was what made it worse. A man lingering near a bus stop. A woman standing too close behind her in line for coffee. A black sedan idling longer than necessary at an intersection. Maya was small. 5'2", slim, her strength always more mental than physical, but she was observant. And today, observation felt like a liability. She stepped into an electronics store near Pike Street, pretending to browse camera equipment while checking reflections in glass displays. Her own camera, an aging DSLR she'd bought used years ago, hung from her shoulder like an extension of her body. When she stepped back outside, the camera was gone. The strap had been cut cleanly. Her phone vibrated almost immediately. "Stop digging if you don't want your mother hurt." Maya's breath left her all at once. Her mother lived alone in a quiet suburb south of the city. Fragile, kind, unaware of any of this. Maya's hands shook, but she didn't cry. Fear hardened into something colder. She typed one word back. "Who?" No response came. Across town, Raymond Ray Cole sat at his kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating stacks of old files. The apartment was modest, second-floor walk-up, faint smell of coffee and dust, but it was orderly. Ray liked order. He needed it. He opened a manila folder marked North Harbor, closed. Or at least it had been marked that way. Now, pages were missing. Not torn out, not obviously removed. Just gone. Key interview transcripts. A financial cross-reference he distinctly remembered highlighting in red. The absence was surgical. Ray leaned back slowly, the chair creaking beneath him. "They cleaned it," he muttered. Someone had gone into sealed records, someone with access. At the courthouse, proceedings resumed, but the tone had shifted. Holloway was sharper now, pressing his advantage. Zariah responded carefully, conserving energy, choosing words like stepping stones across thin ice. She felt alone, not because no one believed her, but because belief without proof was useless here. As the session adjourned for the day, Judge Hargrove addressed the room. "This court will reconvene tomorrow," he said. "Ms. Brooks, be prepared to proceed within the bounds of admissible evidence." Zariah nodded. As she gathered her papers, she caught Maya's eye briefly. Maya lifted her phone slightly, then slipped it back into her coat. An unspoken message. Something's wrong. Zariah understood. Outside, rain fell harder now, washing the courthouse steps in silver sheets. Power moved quietly in that rain, unseen, confident, certain it would not be challenged. And for the first time since the trial began, Zariah felt the full height of the wall in front of her. The courtroom returned to its rigid order with the finality of a door closing. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, pale and unkind, flattening color into shades of gray. Zariah Brooks stood with a single tablet balanced in her hands, the thin glass reflecting her face back at her. Steady, tired, resolved. This was everything she had left. "Your Honor," she said, voice clear, "I'm submitting my final materials." Grant Holloway straightened in his chair. His confidence had sharpened into something colder over the last 24 hours. He looked rested, prepared, like a man who knew which way the wind would blow. Zariah began with the code. She walked the court through a stripped-down malware sample, nothing theatrical, no jargon meant to impress. She showed how it mimicked amateur signatures while quietly rerouting packets to an internal node. She displayed a timeline comparing reported breaches against internal maintenance windows. She brought up an email header, partial, incomplete, a fragment recovered from a damaged archive, suggesting coordination labeled only as clean up. The jurors watched. Some leaned forward. One man tapped a pen against his knee, slower with each slide. "This," Zariah said, pausing on the final screen, "is not proof of guilt. It's proof of intent. Someone wanted a breach to be seen, not understood." Holloway rose immediately. "Objection. The email is unauthenticated." Judge Malcolm Hargrove didn't hesitate. "Sustained." Zariah nodded once, accepting the blow, and continued. She knew the weaknesses. She named them herself. No verified sender, no chain of custody, no originating server presented under oath. She was not pretending otherwise. "I'm asking the court to see the pattern," she said. "Not to convict on it, but to acknowledge it." Judge Hargrove's expression didn't soften. "Ms. Brooks," he said, measured and firm, "patterns are not verdicts." Silence followed, the kind that presses down rather than explodes. Holloway seized it. "Your Honor," he said, voice calm, almost regretful, "the defendant has now presented all available materials and conceded their deficiencies. The state moves to deny any further motions for discovery and requests immediate remand. Given the seriousness of the offense and the defendant's demonstrated technical capability, there is a clear risk of flight and continued criminal activity." Zariah felt it then. Not surprise, not anger, but the inevitability of gravity. Judge Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. The earlier skepticism was gone, replaced by something like disappointment. Less in her, more in the situation itself. "This court finds," he said, "that the evidence presented is insufficient to compel action against North Harbor Systems. Furthermore, the materials offered by the defense fail to meet admissibility standards required for consideration." He paused. "Motion for remand is granted." The words landed with a dull finality. Zariah did not speak. She did not protest. She placed the tablet carefully on the table, aligning it with the edge. Her hands were steady. The bailiff approached. A man named Daniel Ruiz, early 50s, broad-shouldered, with graying hair cropped close. His face was impassive, professional. He had escorted dozens of defendants out of this room. He had never looked one in the eye quite like this. "I'm sorry," he murmured, barely audible. Zariah turned, offering a small nod. As the cuffs closed around her wrists, a ripple moved through the gallery. Not laughter this time. Unease. A few jurors avoided looking at her. One woman pressed her lips together, eyes shining with something unsaid. At the back of the room, Maya Linford stood, camera raised on instinct. Her hands trembled, but she held the frame. When Zariah passed, their eyes met. Zariah leaned just close enough for her voice to carry. "Don't look at them," she said quietly. "Look at the data." Maya swallowed hard and nodded. Outside the courtroom, as the doors closed behind the bailiff, Ray Cole stood near a column, coat collar turned up. He watched Zariah disappear down the corridor. Small, unbowed, taken by a system that had decided patience was weakness. That was when Ray made his choice. Back in his apartment, the city humming faintly through thin windows, Ray opened every box he had sworn never to open again. He spread files across the table, notes, transcripts, financial anomalies, names that had once been whispered and then erased. He scanned, copied, encrypted. He sent one package to the State Attorney General's office, another to an old friend. Lena Morales, a cybercrimes analyst with a reputation for stubborn integrity and a scar across her cheek from a case that had cost her a promotion. The message was brief. They cleaned it once. They missed things. Don't. In the holding room beneath the courthouse, Zariah sat alone on a metal bench. The walls were painted a tired beige, chipped in places. A clock ticked loudly, each second exaggerated in the quiet. She closed her eyes and replayed the data in her mind. Not the rejection, not the cuffs, but the pattern. The math still worked. Truth didn't stop being true because a court said not yet. Above ground, rain intensified, drumming against glass and stone. Somewhere in the city, power congratulated itself, and somewhere else, quietly, the fuse continued to burn. The holding room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paint. Zariah Brooks sat on the metal bench with her hands resting loosely on her knees, eyes closed, listening to the rhythm of the building. Footsteps above, a distant door slamming, the low murmur of voices carried through vents. The cuffs had been removed for processing, but the weight of them lingered in her wrists like memory. She didn't think about the judge or the prosecutor. She replayed the data again and again, tracing pathways in her mind until they aligned the way they always had. Across the city, Maya Linford sat hunched over her kitchen table, laptop open, coffee gone cold. The room was small and cluttered with notebooks and cables, a place that smelled like paper and determination. Maya's shoulders were tight, jaw set. She had locked the door, pulled the blinds, and muted her phone. Except for one message she kept pinned to the top of the screen. Don't look at them. Look at the data. She did. The USB lay between her hands. The wave engraving caught the light as she turned it, remembering Zariah's last glance, the way it had carried instruction without panic. Maya reopened the lock screen. 2 prompts blinked back, a verse reference and coordinates. She had tried scripture before. This time she tried pattern. Sea glass didn't come from storms. It came from time and pressure. She mapped the coordinates to a tide chart, then cross-referenced the verse to a public ledger, numbers repeating where they shouldn't. Maya typed again, slower, letting the rhythm guide her. The lock released with a soft chime. Files spilled across the screen, raw, untouched, beautiful in their brutality. Original server images with cryptographic signatures intact. Transaction logs layered beneath innocuous contract names. Maintenance records that didn't align with downtime. And there it was, unmistakable. Lighthouse ledger, complete and uncut, with internal notes admitting to log reconstruction. The signatures matched, machine and human. Maya laughed once, breathless, then pressed her palm to her mouth to stop the sound from breaking into sobs. She worked fast. She mirrored the drive, verified hashes, documented chain of custody with obsessive care. Then she called a number she hadn't dialed in years. Raymond Ray Cole answered on the second ring. "Ray," Maya said, voice shaking. "It's real." Ray was standing in his living room, coat still on, cane leaning against the wall. The old investigator's face was calm now, focused in the way it used to be before cases were taken from him. He listened as Maya spoke, eyes closing briefly as if he were checking each claim against a ledger of his own. "Good," he said when she finished. "Don't send it to me. Send it where it can't be buried." Within hours, the State Attorney General's office convened a closed-door meeting. The materials Maya submitted were pristine. When Ray arrived to testify, he brought context, dates, names, the reasons his investigation had been halted without explanation. He walked carefully, cane tapping the marble floor, posture straight despite the years. "I was told to stand down," Ray said evenly. Not because the trail went cold, because it was getting warm. The Attorney General nodded once and ordered protections. That was when Evan Sutter agreed to step forward. Evan arrived pale but composed, hair combed back as if ritual could steady him. He wore a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit his narrow shoulders. Under witness protection, his hands stopped shaking long enough to speak clearly. He described the internal culture at North Harbor, the euphemisms, the cleanup, the way risk was reframed as innovation. He identified the developer keys used to stage the breach and explained how logs were altered to point outward. The emergency hearing was called at dawn. Judge Malcolm Hargrove took the bench again, but this time the room felt different. The evidence was not thin folders or partial emails. It was steel. Forensics verified on the record. Warrants were issued. Servers were seized. North Harbor's facade cracked all at once. Contracts labeled cybersecurity consulting funneled money through shell entities. Audits were massaged. Investigations were nudged. The phrase conflict of interest appeared in bold in more than one filing. Grant Holloway sat silent as questions landed. Donations reclassified. Meetings disclosed. His polished certainty drained away under the light of verified fact. He was placed under investigation before the day ended. The inquiry widened. Judge Hargrove recused himself, then faced an ethics review. His remarks, his dismissals, the pattern of bias laid bare by transcript and timing. The system, slow as it was, turned. Zariah was released that afternoon. When the door opened and her name was called, she stood without hurry. The corridor smelled different in daylight. Outside, rain had cleared, leaving the city rinsed and bright. Maya waited at the steps, eyes red, smile unsteady. Ray stood beside her, taller somehow than he had been days earlier. "You did it," Maya said. Zariah shook her head gently. "We did." In the weeks that followed, the charges were dismissed with prejudice. North Harbor's executives resigned in a blur of press releases and subpoenas. The story broke in careful chapters, Maya's byline steady, unflinching. It won awards she hadn't imagined wanting. The moment that mattered more came on a quiet morning when her mother set the paper down, reached across the table, and said, "You saved people." Ray's name was cleared. A letter arrived, restoring his commendation. He found Zariah one evening at a small community center, boxes stacked high with donated equipment. He handed her an old badge, edges worn smooth. "Justice," he said, voice rough. "Sometimes needs the young to remind the old what they believed." Evan Sutter began building a safe channel, encrypted, redundant, human-centered, so whistleblowers could shelter their data before it disappeared. He named it Harbor Light. Zariah declined the quiet offers. She used the restitution funds to launch Brookline Access Lab, a place with open doors and long tables where kids learned networks and ethics together. She taught with patience and precision, insisting on both. On opening day, she taped a simple note to the wall. Evidence beats appearance. The city moved on, it always did, but the data remained. At the end of this story, the lesson is simple and human. In everyday life, we often judge too quickly. We look at clothes, background, silence, or skin color, and we decide who is capable and who is not. But truth does not announce itself loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly waiting for someone brave enough to protect it. Zariah did not win because she was loud or powerful. She won because she stayed faithful to truth, even when standing alone. In our own lives, there will be moments when doing the right thing makes us look wrong. Moments when speaking up costs comfort, reputation, or safety. This story reminds us that integrity still matters, evidence still matters, and courage has a way of reaching the light, even if it takes time. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to you the most. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing truth, justice, and healing to light. And finally, may God bless every person watching. May He protect those who stand alone, strengthen those who speak truth, and comfort those who feel unheard. If you agree with this message and believe that faith and justice walk together, type Amen in the comments.